Welcome to the Cove Podcast, your stop for PME on the go.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Cove Podcast. I'm your regular host, Captain Todd Lempar. But on today's episode, we're going to talk about the MEC system, and I won't go through the initialisation because I think we're going to do that in the episode itself. But we're going to go through the MEC system, and my guest today, or co-host, is Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Wing. Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Wing was an infantry officer at the 2nd Battalion and the 1st Battalion Royal Australian Regiment. He deployed to East Timor as a Company 2IC, as the Adjutant to the Solomons, and as a combat team commander in Afghanistan. He then conducted 12 years of medical training to become a doctor, some of that in hospitals, some of that doing complex theory. But his last posting was the Senior Medical Officer at Joint Health Unit South New South Wales and ACT, but he's now the SMO, or the Senior Medical Officer, for the Director of Army Health. Welcome, sir.
Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. This has been a long time coming as well, this episode. We sort of toed and froed about getting it done, and we've both sort of, I suppose, in constructing some of the questions, we've used some of the content you've already delivered, and I think it's awesome stuff we're going to go through. But the important thing is we're going to talk about the MEC system itself, but more broadly, and I think the MEC system is only a process or a system to enable commanders. But the aim of this episode is to enable you as commanders or people who may have been outside the system of supervising troops for a while to look after those troops that you supervise. But also, some people don't really get exposure until they actually go through the system themselves. And we're trying to front load with a little bit of information about how to make the system the most successful. And the end state is back to deployable MEC status or otherwise, but we'll get into that. Firstly, I think we'll come back a little bit. So infantry officer, combat team commander in Afghanistan, on the pointy end, loving it. What motivated you to make the huge leap to do medicine and become a doctor?
Yeah, look, I still stand by the fact that being OC 6 Platoon Bravo Company 1RR was the best paid job I've ever had. It was complex. Number of factors just coalesced. Is my brother, who also went through RMC, had become a doctor, and on my mum's deathbed she just said, I always thought it would have been you studying medicine and your brother staying in the army. And that kind of rattled around the head for a bit. And then it was also when that junction comes up for a lot of officers, I had the offer to go to staff college, but my partner, now wife, said, you know, you only get one life. You've always wanted to be a doctor, and you've kind of got a bit of jealousy about what your brother's done and what he's achieving. Why don't you pursue that? And that's, I guess, where it came. Had some very supportive people along the way, and I'm blessed to be here today. It takes a village to raise a doctor, particularly in the service environment. I've had a lot of people looking out after me. So, yeah.
And I suppose it's that constant struggle of balancing the service life, but also medicine as well throughout. Like, not many people, I mean, we all have different jobs, but you generally have some like regulations on the civilian side and a hell of a lot of training to go through, plus maintaining the service life. Is that, I mean, so you decided to become a doctor. Why an army doctor though? Why did you decide to still serve as a doctor?
I think it's fundamentally because you're in a unique position as a doctor to both advocate for patients and advocate for commanders as well, and try and get that balance. And it's very different, I think, to civilian general practice, for example. There's a significant occupational overlay that comes with the job. And I believe that my previous experience would help me to do that somewhat better. And I had some great doctors back in the bad old days when we had regimental aid posts and we had a doctor in every unit. Had some great role models, and equally some not so great role models in there. Like, it wasn't all fantastic times when we had our own doctors in units, and it is quite a difficult capability to manage. You know, I used to make the joke about the fact that at the end of the day, infantry can do a lot of other jobs in the army in extremis. However, the human body is a little bit more complicated than that. It takes a lot longer to grow a health professional.
For those that are not as familiar, what is a senior medical officer and what do they do?
So the main role that a senior medical officer has is quite often they're the nexus between command and the health system in whatever context you want to look at. So if you look at, say, the job that I and many other people did in Townsville, you might be the senior single service medical officer in Townsville, for example, because the joint health units that are run by Joint Health Command, they can be all different flavours of senior medical officer in there. And so it's your job to be that nexus between what's working for command, what's not working for the medical system, and try and bring the two together as best you can with the resources that you have available. So one thing, I guess, is what senior medical officers who are uniformed are where people look to them, is the occupational overlay and the context to flesh that out, that, say, a contracted health provider medical officer may or may not have, but also amongst our contracted health provider workforce that exists within Joint Health Command, not that I'm no longer part of that organisation, is that there's also a lot of ex-military medical officers working within that system, and there's also, depending on the locale, some excellent initiatives to get people familiar with the occupational and environmental hazards that someone serving may face. But as the senior medical officer, I guess you're that point, particularly where it comes to policy surrounding deployability and employability and function of individuals to meet the mission task.
Did you get still a lot of the tactical stuff? We talked about like the MEC system itself, sitting on unit welfare boards, and we'll go through welfare boards in a moment, and the MEC system more broadly, advising on individual readiness, and then MEC classification and stuff as well, and review boards. But do you still get time doing the tactical stuff when you're in those combat brigades? I now know it's restructured underneath the Joint Health Unit, so the SMO sits inside the Joint Health Unit, provides support to the local area or to the brigade
to the actual brigade. So when you're in Townsville, for example, the senior medical officer of the Joint Health Unit will have input into the brigade. It's mainly, though, in the delivery of garrison health services to enable the force. So things like, for a health system, you need prevention, treatment, evacuation and sustainment. I guess you'd say garrison health is responsible for the prevention and the medical readiness piece. And I'm talking outside my lane here. I've just worked for it and within it. But that's sort of where the senior medical officer in a Joint Health Unit, the role that I had in Townsville as a senior medical officer at that stage before the restructure occurred and we got a health brigade, I was the senior medical officer of the close health company. So all of the med techs that supported field training, we now call it operations, activities and investments overseas, the nurses that were in that. And since the restructure, that's been fleshed out a bit by the addition of dentists and psychologists in there. But the health effect, if you like, we still have senior medical officers at that level as well.
So you talked about like having a unique perspective, or being hinted that uniformed doctors, there are many with some manoeuvre sort of experience or different experience within the Army themselves before they go through medical school. Do you think that gives a unique perspective for those for those in this that have been RMC instructors like yourself, that have been adjutants, that have been combat team commanders and looking at that sort of medicine as the way forward? Do you think it provides a real benefit to have served in units and then seeing medical plans, to approve them as a SMO, I suppose?
It helps, but you don't have to be dead to sell life insurance either. And we have some wonderful people who have had no military experience who have come into the organisation drunk from the proverbial fire hose, but equally, I don't think you can characterise it as, the retread population versus those who have no experience, because everyone brings something unique. Like a medical officer in particular, like just by virtue of getting into the course and completing the course, there's a fair amount of ability to assimilate information. So it really is on the individual, and some eat it up and some don't, and equally some former serving people don't go as well necessarily. Well, that's a bit disparaging, and I'll remove myself from that. But I don't think you can characterise it as simply previous experience. What matters, though, is that you understand the environment and the occupational and environmental hazards likely to be encountered and how that is going to interact with the condition that a member may or may not have, and what the particular health threats might be, which is quite topical right now as well, because depending on where you are in the world, the threats that you may face from the environment are very, very different, for example.
You as a person, where we got to now, and SMOs more broadly, but let's go back to the MEC system. I suppose What is the MEC system? And a number of us, I've been in the Army for 15 years and sat at J11, and it's only through exposure to other people's progress through the system that you get exposure to that. I suppose, what is the MEC system more broadly, and whose tool is it? Who designed it and who used it?
That's a really good question, and it's one that is often very misunderstood, Todd. So MEC stands for Military Employment Classification System. It's not a medical system at all. It is a personnel system. And a lot of the other parts that I guess input into that whole military employment classification process, things like the Military Employment Classification Review Board, the MECRB, for want of a better term, that's a personnel process with medical input. And the key to remember is medical officers, like all we do is recommend. At the end of the day, it's supporting commanders to inform them of the risk and whether or not they're willing to accept that risk. What MEC does, because it's ultimately described in MIL-PERSMAN, which is ADF headquarter level policy, is a system, I guess, for stratifying the function of people and looking at what the function means for the impact on the environment in which they work and what the environment in which they work may do to their function as a result of the medical condition or otherwise that they might have. Now, it's very important to understand that for commanders, it's a friendly force information requirement. It lets you know as to the disposition and I guess predisposition your force may have to precipitating conditions or culmination or attrition in particular environments. So from that point of view, it's very much a personnel system with medical input. And then there's when the policy cascades down, because MIL-PERSMAN's fairly overarching, and just like we have the Geneva Convention and we go down the operational level, then you have laws of armed conflict, we've got the Defence Health Manual, and then when you get down the tactical level, if you like, for the single service in Army, we have the Army Standing Instruction Personnel, Part 8, Medical, Chapter 3, Pull Hems, which goes into a lot of prescriptive detail to stratify people's function and come up with a enterprise-wide friendly force information requirement that informs everyone of where the peak function for that individual may reside in the organisation. Does that answer some of the question?
That's like the system, I suppose. Yeah, exactly right. I think we think about it in more of a restrictive rather than permissive sort of context, but also like we use terms like downgrading to go down the MEC system and stuff. You get to see so many, and we'll get to welfare boards in a moment, you get to see so many welfare boards, you get to see have sat on so many reviews or been part of the system. What are your thoughts for that component of it, which is that it's restrictive, not permissive, and that people get downgraded through the system?
So firstly and foremost, it's protective, not punitive. Now, I'm pretty simple in my thinking, but for those of you out there who are familiar with the armoured triangle, and you've got firepower, mobility and protection on each angle, which would be 60 degrees because it's an equilateral triangle, I suppose, is that if you replace that with at the top of that triangle with protect the short and long-term health interests of the member, and I'll come back and talk about why they're sometimes mutually exclusive. And then if you go down to the bottom, one of the bottom corners of that triangle, protect the people they serve alongside, if you like, the balance left to do the toil, and then also protect the mission, the capability and the organisation. Now, from a peacetime perspective, it helps with enshrining a lot of things we know about work cover, i.e. that you shouldn't take someone who's predisposed and put them in an environment where you're going to precipitate that condition or make it worse. But also operationally, what it allows us to do is identify people who are put in areas without much health support, where there is limited health support. Like, I want to make it clear, no stretch of the imagination am I emergency doctor, and dealing with emergencies, when there's medical technicians, one doctor who may be very junior and a nurse trying to deal with a serious medical emergency, our health support needs to be tailored to the function that people have in the operational environment. And this allows us to do that when we operationalise, to work out we have the right people with the right function at the right place. appropriate.
You're talking about tailoring like treatment teams and sort of casualty evacuation and stuff based on the figures that the commander gets because he knows his disposition of his force or his or her force. Sorry.
Well, it allows people to do that. So it allows a enterprise-wide bold adjustment, if you like, of what the disposition of the force is and then what health support may be required once you cascade down through the different military employment classifications, if you like.
And I suppose those classifications we're talking about.
So you're J11, for example. So that basically means that there is no reason why we can't deploy you with minimal health support because you don't have anything identified where it's likely to predispose. Now, wherever we go in the land domain, there's occupational environmental threats everywhere, from the stuff the loads that we have to carry to the environmental conditions, the fauna, the potential single-strand RNA virus that's actively trying to kill you, fauna that's trying to kill you, the climate is trying to kill you. All of these things mean that, well, there's nothing really there that we can see in Todd that we need to be concerned about or provide additional health support requirements forward for, other than what we normally would to deal with trauma and the like at this point in time and to deal with baseline primary health care. Because this is another thing that we need to understand as well. There's a very good study by The Guardian in 2014, everyone can Google it, but in World War II, non-battle casualties or disease actually killed more people than enemy action. And taking away from that, MacArthur also has a famous quote, "Is going to be a long war if I always have one division with malaria, one division recovering from malaria, and only one division to fight the enemy." So from that perspective as well, we anticipate that based on you, J11, going forward, we need to provide primary health care and a bit of other bits and pieces. Where it becomes more complex is when you get J2, that means deployable with support requirements, and the various stratification of J21, 2, 3. I missed out J22 as well, so sorry for anyone who's got a military employment classification of J22.
Yeah, so we talked about J1, J2 being completely deployable, no issues. I suppose J3 being sort of like can deploy, and I'm making a very arbitrary, but can deploy, in my arbitrary understanding, into the field and the like. What's the sort of, I presume that J4 and J5, no, there's no way they can deploy.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Todd. Thanks. So with going back to what the military employment classification system enables, it's trying to, I guess, stratify between deployable function, function isn't just limited to, your ability to do push-ups or carry body armour. Function's also related to the type of treatment that you might be needing for your condition. So someone who's got to be seeing a specialist, at a period interval, 2 weekly or a monthly or 3 monthly, that impacts your function for the deployed environment because we don't have all those things when we go forward. So we talk about deployability and then there's employability. So not in the deployed environment, but you've still got function, but it's for the employable environment. And there where your J4s come into play. So we've got J40 means awaiting MEC-RB determination. J41 means fit for service transfer. Now J42 means that's an offer. So it's saying that you don't have at this point in time function compatible with the deployable environment, and as a result that you could otherwise medically transition, but you are employable. So we're going to try and keep you as a J42. And what that means is in your current role, and this is where as commanders the workplace capacity report is crucial for this, to say, talk about what the member can do and how they can contribute and continue to contribute. And then these people are kept. So you've got to be able to turn up to, on a full-time basis to the workplace. It might mean that you'll have a whole bunch of restrictions that say it might be you can't work shift work. It may be that you can't be deployed north of Brisbane. It may be that there's a whole range of things, but you can still contribute in so many different ways. So the important thing is to remember, because we don't want to cause any harm and precipitate someone with a predisposing condition. The caveats around J42 are not for field, sea or ops. and they shouldn't be employed in that way. Because what we might think in the field environment is perfectly like a barracks environment, it's not. The environmental controls are completely different. The hours worked may be completely different. There's a lot more precipitating factors. Camp Makalani, for example, at high range has a lot more communicable disease and vector-borne threats than what you would face down the hill in a garrison environment. So that's why those caveats are there. No field, no sea, no ops for the J4 designated, but full employment. You know, the individual's good to go. And then there's a new mech that's come in the last 12 months, 2 years, J49. And J49 means that you have a condition that's likely to remain stable, but the individual risk assessment for putting you into the deployed environment and the full spectrum of occupational environmental hazards, it's not conscionable and it's not good for anyone, going back to those protect you, the people you serve alongside in the mission. But it means you can still have a career and you're retained by the service and you can progress through the ranks, be promoted for as long as you choose. And so that is, I guess, where we stratify deployable and employable function, because employable function is still really useful to the organisation.
Yeah. And where we do most of the business realistically on normal years, I suppose. I say normal, none of normal. But what you just said before about J4, I think there's a couple of people that they've come up to me, especially training officers and stuff, and they've been J31 or J32 or J3 for some period of time, and they've gone J4 and they think that it's worse. They're like, oh no, it must be, I didn't realise I was J4, this is way worse. Like, what's the ramifications? It's obviously, as your description just there of J4, that's not how it works. Do you know what I mean? I think we'll get to the common myths at the end, but that's a common myth, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. And it's good that you're raising that common myth now, is that, so what it means is that you have the offer, because the service can no longer deploy you, and when you signed up, you've signed up for the full scope of what it is that your role offered, is that you can't do that anymore. So a J42 means that you can medically transition, and you can medically transition at any time as a J42. However, the service still values you and wants to retain you in a role. Okay, it's just that the individual health risk assessment with putting you forward can't be supported for the occupational environmental hazards of the deployed environment. And so typically you get J42 for a period, and then what we're starting to see a lot of now is people will transition to a J49. So their conditions are all stable, they're being appropriately managed, there's no further deterioration or decompensation, and they're still giving really good service to either Army, Navy or Air Force. And then you start to get into the bespoke mechs for each environment or domain. Like the Navy have their maritime mechs, we have our land-based mechs, and they're prefixed with an M or an L. So, and they needed to be awarded, or I said classified, if you like, would be a better term, by the Military Employment Classification Review Board. So they're your L27, L28 and J29. Does that make sense so far?
I suppose it does make sense, absolutely. And the bespoke ones for each of the domains. I suppose if we go from J11 downgraded to a different sort of...
Can I just stop you there, Todd, if that's okay? Language is really important. And I think, you know, one of the things that I had was formerly a Mandarin linguist as well, is that language and meaning, there is a lot of nuance in it. And I think it's much better that we use the term reallocate and reclassify to take any way comparative disadvantage. And I know JHC policy are very keen to do likewise, but I think it's important because there's this whole culture built up around, I'm going to be downgraded, it's horrendous, you know, the end of the world. It's like, well, it's actually what it's doing is putting up force field around you, if you like, going back to that friendly force information requirement to the wider enterprise, that you have a condition and you're undergoing active rehabilitation at the moment as a J31, or it might be a J34, or it might be a J33 if you're, you know, expecting a child. So, and what it does is then identifies you as someone who can't be considered. So it allows you to get on with your rehabilitation, because that's the goal. Most people who undergo rehabilitation get better and get reclassified back to a deployable mech. And I think there's a lot of negativity associated with the whole system that is founded on culture and perceptions rather than actual reality. Because overwhelmingly, people get reclassified up to a deployable mech.
And I think that's when you said before, you said a UJ11 and then you said you haven't had anything identified. That's the thing, right? So like we think that we shouldn't go forward and have things identified because of, the perception about the system. But in actual fact, it's there to help us and also to have commanders regularly review us so we don't get lost in the ether, I suppose.
That's right. And it's a key signal. Like if there's one thing the Brereton inquiry identified was curiosity of command. And there's a number of signals, I guess, that the medical system will give you as a commander to then choose to or not to interrogate. Actually, we won't use interrogate, that's a bit of a harsh word. We'll say to analyse a bit further as to what might be going on with an individual. So the first one is a PM 532, which is a notice of military employment classification, which will say a person's mech has changed. The other thing that will usually occur as well is there'll be a PM 101 that precedes that, because usually you have to have had a condition that is limiting your function for deployment for 56 days. So there's been a bit of a build-up to that because you're getting a PM 101 is an advice to command. So there within the, and we know we're going to talk about welfare boards, but so you've got two, if you like, signals there that something probably needs to be looked at a bit closer from a command perspective in order to manage that person. Now, we used to do this really well. Like we used to just talk to people and ask, how are you going? Are you all right? There is one problem though with MEC as a friendly force information requirement, and that is the number of false positives, i.e. the number of people who, for whatever reason, like we talk about civilian workforce has a problem with absenteeism. A good friend of mine who's now the APS doctor at the ACT Health Centre, Lloyd Malone, who, if ever I'm half as good a doctor as him, points out we have a problem in Defence Force with presenteeism. People, through fear that somehow they're going to miss out on deployment, will avoid seeking treatment. And in most cases, it's a stitch in time saves nine. The earlier you get onto a treatment pathway, the less likely it's going to be a problem further down the track. And one thing, unfortunately, we see a lot of is a bit like when I talked about the long-term health interests of an individual, is for anyone who's seen the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail with the Black Knight. Yeah, so one person, no arms or legs, waving a sword, I'm still up for it, is people get to the point where there's so many things that have become chronic that it becomes, the analogy I use is you can't undo what's occurred over years to years without intervention in weeks to months. It takes a longer period of rehab time. So the sooner you get in there and present, the sooner you get on a pathway. And to be honest, health centre throughput problems aside that exist nationwide is once you get onto a specialist external provider, it's actually pretty good and you get seen a lot faster than what you would in the public system, for example.
Yeah, your part about reluctancy for deployability is like even people in training or staff that return to training and know they're going to be in training for 2 years, right? Perfect opportunity to do some rehabilitation that they've otherwise put off. They shouldn't, but they have. And they're still reluctant to go and forward with and identify the issues they've got to get proper rehab and get allocated a rehab consultant and go through the process of physio and repairing themselves. They're still reluctant because of the, negative stigma or I'm not sure what it is. But yeah, have you seen that much?
It is definitely a factor, is that, and I think a lot of this stems from when we kind of had the deployment of Thon from 99 onwards, that everyone was concerned that, if I don't have a mech compatible with the deployed environment right now, I won't be considered. Things have certainly slowed down a lot in that regard. And so, but what's more important is, there's an old saying out there, health is our greatest wealth. Long after your career in the military finishes, you've still got a long time to live. And this is where we get into the long-term health interests. It's better to make sure you're fit for 80 as well. That's something else you've got to be managing, because it goes back to how MEC is protective. Is if you're masking something, and Mil Persman actually mentions quite clearly member responsibilities, if you have something that affects your deployability, to present and be assessed. And the reason for that, I go back to the other two parts of that triangle I mentioned earlier is we're also got to protect the people you serve alongside and protect the mission and capability as well. And so you've probably been there as well and had to actually make a decision about yourself or others, is that it's too much risk to take you right now. And the classic example that I use with people, anyone who's been to the Jungle Training Centre in Tully in North Queensland knows what it's like to be in a section that starts out as 9 and someone who's gone in predisposed, who hasn't fully recovered from an ankle injury, rolls it good and proper because they're predisposed. It takes a long time for all of those nerves and understanding of where the ankle is, and you go into an environment where there is nothing but uneven ground. They disappear. And then someone else who went in there who twisted a knee 3 weeks earlier, who, is now carrying more load because that other person's left, they twist their knee and they go. For the remaining 7 of that 9, all of a sudden their pickets have become longer and
the load is the
staring
same.
at
They're carrying the same load across. Yeah.
And the task hasn't changed,
No.
what they have to do. The ability to, do things like rotate your scouts is gone. And so these are the things that we need to keep in mind as well. It's protective not just for the individual, but the people they serve alongside and the mission and the task.
Yeah. And you talked about force fields before, providing a force field for the individual to get through their rehabilitation and come back and reclassify. But what are welfare boards? So when you get reclassified, there's a requirement to conduct welfare boards 4 times a year or once every quarter. There's also individual welfare boards as well, so they get held ad hoc. But what's the difference in the two, and what's the aim of a welfare board, I suppose?
So that's a really good question, Todd, so your unit welfare board is something that, because welfare isn't just health, basically welfare can set the conditions for health, the same way as the medical system can set the conditions for health as well. And there needs to be a nexus between the two, like an overlap in there of the two, because both contribute to that overall health effect for the member. Is where a welfare board comes in, because welfare could be someone has legal problems, someone has administrative problems in the unit, and it's a review, a bold adjust, and they're unit welfare boards. And typically a medical officer may or may not be present, or a health professional, we'll start with that. And then out of that, that's kind of like I like to think of it as that's the sort. And then so you sort people, and you might identify people out there who need an individual welfare board with a number of people present to provide technical advice. So the classic one is the individual welfare board for people with medical conditions or reasons who need closer management from the chain of command. And it doesn't always have to be a medical officer in attendance. It could be a psychologist, could be a physiotherapist, could be a rehab coordinator, who also, everyone gets the option when they're reclassified as J31 for referral to rehabilitation services. And where rehab is fantastic is they're the end of the health system. They can actually
they negotiate the system, and they're all over it because they have a number of different people that they're supporting. I suppose they know exactly where to go and how to tap into the MO and stuff as well. Yeah,
you've got it. For someone who hasn't had that interaction, you've nailed it, Todd. So, but quite often a lot of people opt out and they elect to self-manage, and sometimes that isn't as productive as what you think. And that's also part of, I guess, who we are, is we don't like to be a burden on people. But the reality of it is so many people have managed throughout their career, and even for soldiers, looked after other people as well, is that it's okay to take a bit of time for you, and it's okay to ask for a bit of help when you need it. That's perfectly understandable. Like, we're not all, Superman every hour of the day. Many people like to think we are. But it's important that when we go through the welfare board process in an individual welfare board, that the right technical experts are there. You don't need to do it for that. It could be someone undergoing a court appearance. You might want to get the brigade legal down, for example. But it's having the right people there. And the way to do it is you need member consent. And the member has the option of saying, look, I don't want my company 2IC. I don't want my platoon commander in the room. I don't want the CSM. I don't want the RSM. I'm only happy for the CO and the doctor. And that's within their rights to do so. But it's very useful for, I guess, alignment. And I'll quote Craig Malcolm, who was the CEO of 2nd 14th, who spoke to an Army Senior Medical Officer Forum, and he said, look, from everything that we've seen in the unit is that when we don't get the right people in the room early, command and the the supporting health professionals, is when things tend to go really wrong for everyone involved. And it's far better that we do that as early as possible. And it's actually mandated in the ASI for Army. If someone's been absent from the workplace for 28 days, you'd conduct a welfare board. If someone has been reclassified as J31, they'd have a welfare board. Now, like deployments, experiences may vary, and not everything occurs like that because people have competing priorities, like particularly people in Townsville, Darwin, Brisbane. There's a lot of stuff going on, and sometimes things get missed, overlooked, probably not as closely managed as they otherwise could be.
You talked about giving consent to those in the room. That's important before we discuss anything. And obviously the MO can't talk to anyone until they have consent, and we all have consent. But the thing is, I walked into a couple of unit welfare boards for people who are, and we're talking about like welfare type stuff, and they're really struggling, right? And the idea of the IWB is to advise command on what they can do to enable the individual. But there's a conference table the length of the entire room, and there's 20 people there. The ADGE, RSMs, company 2IC, welfare officer that's never met the individual, rehab consultant, psychologist, the psychologist ACT, all this sort of stuff. And it's just like, I suppose, is there sort of a happy medium for how many people are in the room? I think it can be quite daunting for the individual. As I go in as their divisional officer or a platoon commander in the past and represent them, it can be incredibly daunting for the individual, I suppose. Have you seen anything like that where it's gone good and also where it's gone bad, I suppose?
Yeah, it is trying to, I guess, have only the minimum number of people and the need to know principle apply in that environment as well. Like, who really needs to be here? Who can get a readout afterwards? What does the consent form say? And the other thing is, I agree with you, quite often the ergonomics or dynamics are not what you'd want to do. It might be better that everyone sit around, with a circle without the barriers in front, and so everyone can be open communication. But the main thing is that they happen. Like, I guess it'd be far better if we were assured that they were occurring in accordance with what is prescribed in policy as a first point, and then tinker around the edges, I think, to make it a much better experience for the individual. But you're 100% right. You've identified some things there as well too, is that one thing that can occur is somehow someone's welfare state is perceived as health. And if you look around, somehow senior health officers get caught up doing a lot of welfare type arrangements in their formation locales. It's like welfare is the chain of command. Medical's medical. We provide recommendations, but the welfare piece of the member is, I guess, a chain of command responsibility. But they need medical input sometimes to assist in how best to manage the individual through that. But there's a lot of things that the chain of command can do to improve the situation of the member. And one thing I'd like to bring out is in the Royal Commission into Veteran Suicide, it was really good. It identified that anyone, and they quoted the Royal Australian Occupational College of Physicians, that if someone is absent from the workplace for more than 20 days for a workplace-related injury, their chances of ever returning to full-time work again sit at about 70%. When you get to 45 days, that drops to 50%. And when you get up to 70 days, is the chances are 30%. So I guess in terms of welfare, one of the best things the chain of command could do is when they start getting not fit for duty is that command curiosity piece, and then go, right, I probably need to do a welfare board. It's mandated at 28-day mark, but command prerogative, you can always request that earlier. And it's a good opportunity forgive the euphemism, for all the dead cats to get on the table and can develop a robust plan for moving forward for the member, because the member is got to be central to this process.
And the whole thing, I think, is coaching the member into the room, because it's likely to be the first time they've ever been in the room. They might not even know the CO, to be honest. Like a lot of the trainees here don't know the CO or anything like that. And the first time they walk in, they've got the commanding officer and all these people. So just remember, all these people want to help your situation. Do you know what I mean? They're there because they genuinely care about you. So I'm happy to brief for the first component as your platoon commander, but the CO and everyone in the room really wants to hear your perspective on the whole thing.
And that's fantastic, that kind of approach, Todd, is that where we create distress in individuals, and this is psychology 101, is where you create a delta between expectation and outcome. So and we know, for example, if you tell someone it's going to hurt before a procedure as opposed to just doing it, then they will experience less pain than what the other would. It comes as a shock.
Is that why surgeons are so callous about like just cutting into veins? It's like, no.
I won't make any comments on my peers, but they're a lot smarter than me. However, is that what you do is by saying this is about you, and it comes back to that cultural piece. There's a perception out there that's, maybe based on experiences of N=1. And so it's really important that people set the scene. This is about you front and foremost. People can have the option of having a partner present or a support person or whatever, but it's really important that they're made to feel at ease, and that's in the lead up and then in the room themselves. And so quite often they can be daunting, but it's really important, that process, that it occurs. That's how we get the best outcome for members, as going back to what CO Second 14 said in 2023, Craig Malcolm.
Yeah. And to come back, like, I suppose the end state for command more broadly, being advised by everyone in the room, but is the individual welfare plan. So we've got a list of things that are going to continue to support the member through a multitude of different facets of their employment and otherwise to enable the member. And then everyone signs that. And it's like, this is the plan forward type thing. So there is a tangible end state that needs to be you need to follow it, and then in subsequent welfare boards, you're going to look at the plan and be like, was this achieved? Did this member get this? And how are we going?
That's exactly right. And the other good thing I've neglected to mention about an individual welfare board is, look, overwhelmingly with the Joint Health Command Garrison Health System, things overwhelmingly go right and well for the vast majority of people, but sometimes they don't, and that can be identified in the individual welfare board. And so as a result of that, things can be actioned, things can be chased. A referral might have, whatever reason, things do end up in the Bermuda Triangle in every large organisation. That can be fished out, can be actioned, can be pushed through. And so it's a really good opportunity, not for Mexican finger pointing, but for everyone to do situation's changed, cross-check, where are we at across the board? Are these referrals in place? No, right, medical's going to go away and sort that out. So from that perspective, they're an invaluable tool. Part of the issue is that probably Garrison Health, when it was set up, wasn't resourced to conduct these, which is one issue which puts further burden on things that we're all familiar with, like wait times. However, there's a whole bunch of body of work occurring at the moment to look to the future to how to improve things currently. So that may change in the future.
That's the MEC system, welfare boards more broadly, and that's some awesome analysis on what it is and what the end state of the entire welfare board is. I throw a number of guests. I'll throw 2 common myths straight away, at the end of the episode, because I think it's an awesome close. It's like, what are the common myths about the MEC system, but more broadly about individuals' welfare, where have you seen it gone right or wrong, if you can provide any individual stories, but also like, what are the common myths?
So the big myth is that MEC is, first and foremost, MEC's punitive. It's actually protective, and it's trying to protect, 3 key stakeholders, I guess, if you like. And it's really important that we don't overly, using the Tully example that I used previously, the people that members serve alongside, but more importantly, their long-term health interests as well. Now, we talked about a force field around people. It doesn't necessarily mean that your whole military life stops when you're J31, that you can be... There's various mechanisms to get you waived, approved, to attend courses, to do certain things, to deploy in support of particular activities. It may be that a clearance or a waiver is required. So that's myth, I guess, number one, is that it's somehow punitive, not protective. The other one is that it is a key friendly force information requirement. It's we want to make sure we have the right people at the right place at the right time with the right function. Now, where things typically go horribly wrong is when people present late, they present in crisis with their condition. You could also argue that, I forget what the exact figures are of ratios of the various genders within the service, but men are known typically as being absolutely hopeless at seeking healthcare, and they typically present late. It's really important for everyone out there that if you identify something that you don't believe is right, you seek treatment straight away. Forget about worrying about mech, everything else, health is the greatest wealth. And so that is quite often, I guess, people presenting late, and then everything that happens after that is a massive shock. So the sooner people can interact with the health system, and look, the one thing about it is persistence prevails when all else fails, is that if you go and sit in a bulk billing practice out in Civvy Street, or you go to an ED, unless you have something seriously wrong with you and you're triaged as a 1 or a 2, you may wait around indefinitely because there will be other people. So the trick is, I guess, is to identifying your health needs and getting appointments ahead of time, rather than waiting till it completely unravels and then you're presenting, quite late in the piece and you're not happy with waiting around. Because everything in the medical system, and you see it in the public system, is triaged. And given what we're preparing for, that's what we do as well. We triage to try and get the greatest benefit for the greatest number. And within the health system, unfortunately, that can mean that sick parade timings might not be to your liking, but once you get seen, you do get on a pathway for, the overwhelming majority of people, and they're well looked after. There's always outliers and the low percentages, which we try and continuously improve and fix.
I think that if you're not getting the right outcomes as well, persistence is key, obviously, as you just argued, but also go to your chain of command who are there to support you and say, can you attend this MO appointment with consent with me, just to give the context behind, because I'm not real familiar with the system, but I don't really know what to tell the MO about, what I'm doing for employment and the like. As we go to review boards, obviously we do comment on, what is expected of each employee and a member's health statement as well, so they get to have a say. But even just at that point, it's I don't think I'm getting what I need. Can you come with me as the platoon commander or whatever to an MO appointment to talk about it?
And going back to the start of the program, what does an SMO do? This is the perfect point, is chain of command reps liaise with either the health centre manager or the senior medical officer of the unit and just say, look, I'm concerned about this situation. And this is what happens. Resolving things at the lowest level is how we should go about. So if there's something that's causing dissatisfaction, then use those avenues that are available to you and go and speak to, if you're a soldier, go and speak to your corporal or bombardier. From there, if you're not getting resolution, your platoon sergeant, and away you go. The one thing I will say is that from a chain of command perspective is that I come from an old school where back in the day you came back from the health centre, the RAP, whatever you want to call it, and it would actually be actively tracked at platoon level or troop level when your next appointment was, to make sure that you got to it. We've kind of lost a lot of visibility in the way because it's brokered between the member and, I think most people overwhelmingly, I've always written on a PM 101 for anyone that I have issued restrictions to about, the ADAT, what. Most people are comfortable with that. And I don't think most people would be concerned if their chain of command knew that they had upcoming medical appointments and the like. Again, it's when it's sprung out of nowhere that it comes as a shock to everyone. I think potentially we all need to get a little bit better because there are a lot of missed appointments, but back in the old days, platoon sergeants used to make sure, come hell or high water, that people would get to those appointments.
I suppose because it's texted to the individual now.
Yeah.
They get the text and
Correct.
there's so much, and platoons only get bigger and all that sort of stuff. It's it starts to get, and I'm not excusing it. It sounds like I am though. But yeah, it's
not at all.
Yeah,
everyone's got competing priorities, and I'm sounding like a single issue zealot on a few things. But health is, it's linked inextricably with welfare of our people, and that's a command responsibility. And so, the people missing appointments and things like that. And it goes back to that thing though, that people don't want to let anyone down. So quite often people will go outfield and they'll miss an appointment and they'll miss their rehab, but that isn't good outcomes. This is where we need to, I guess, make the hard decisions for commanders who are listening, is put a force field around that person, go, it's more important you get rehabbed, so that otherwise we can keep kicking this down the road and it's going to become chronic, and then we're going to have a real problem.
I think the creative means by which some people can get people in the field but also conduct the rehab. I know one of the units I was in took their rehab consultants outfield, and then the physio and an MO would visit periodically as they formed, like they were in Macrossan. And the idea was that field is not a scary place. A lot of them were coming back and absolutely thriving to get back into the unit and like really having that sort of that fear of missing out, I suppose, with all of their crews going out. But some of them were like, I've been out of the field for so long, it makes me incredibly nervous. And an awesome commander I had was like, okay, cool, let's take you out to the field. Macrossan, hard standing, it's up in Townsville field training area. But you're going to conduct your rehab out there with the rehab consultants out there in duty hours. You can't make them sleep overnight. But and then have MOs come out and treat them in the field. It was an absolutely awesome for the mentality to be like, it was good. Like I was out there with everyone and we had a gym and everything set up.
And these are the opportunities that we have, is that this is the biggest, one of the, I guess, pitfalls that we have is that people will be waived because they're mission critical and it foregoes their rehab. The example you just gave is, I guess, a textbook case of how it can be done to meet everyone's intent and everyone's interests are preserved in that. And that's ultimately, again, what it requires is people communicating with each other. And the welfare board is one of the ways that we can do that to make sure that the individual is front and centre, but the chain of command and the medical system are working together to support that individual.
Back to the individual is an awesome point to leave the episode, I think, because I suppose that's ultimately what it's all about. So we went through the military employment classification system, welfare boards more broadly, and a little bit of stuff about being creative, about employing people and looking after individuals and what welfare boards should look like, and then the welfare plan at the end, I suppose, and returning people to a deployable classification. Thank you so much for your time, sir. It's been absolutely awesome.
Yeah, so thanks, Todd. Look, one thing that's near and dear to my heart, if you're not shopping Army or Defence, you're paying way too much. And one thing for everyone out there, if you haven't registered with the ADF Dependent Health Program and you've got a dependent, someone who's classified on PM keys, is because it's an opt-in scheme, don't run to your DPN terminal, print out the A858-1, get it filled out, because what that allows you is for your dependent, when they go see a GP, they can see the GP of their choice. The gap between what Medicare pays to your dependent and what the GP is charging is fully reimbursable, as much and as many occasions of care as is needed in the year. This can amount to several thousands of dollars for just an individual. And the other thing is you get $800 to use for any other health-related, could be specialist treatment, could be physio. It's fantastic, but unfortunately the penetrance of the scheme isn't probably where we'd like it to be for a key recruitment and retention initiative. So please avail yourself to it. Just remember, if you're not shopping Army, you're paying way too much. And look, I'm happy to come back in and we can talk more about demystify what the MEC-RB process is, because it's very much a case of if not, why not, for keeping people employable as long as possible. Thanks very much, Todd.
Thanks, sir. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Cove Podcast. Explore our channel for more great audio PME content. Also, visit us at cove.army.gov.au for hundreds of additional resources. The Cove, the learning home of the Australian profession of arms.